Hello, everybody. A lot of you will have seen the piece that I wrote last week on, or the week before on Property Industry Eye, talking about problems with communication in the property buying and selling process, which involves lenders, solicitors, and estate agents. And I'm pleased to say that someone who commented on that piece and someone who's come back to me and said, well, let's have a quick talk about it is probably someone who needs no introduction, which is Peter Ambrose. So, Peter, why don't you introduce who you are and what you do and why it's interesting to talk to you?
Yeah, it's great to talk to you, Ed. I run the partnership. I've been running this business for about 10 years now. We're property lawyers. That's all we do. My background was in technology. I spent years and years in software, but also running service desks. And we've seen firsthand the impact that having decent technology can make in the process. One of the things that really frustrates me is that people will quite often say, "Oh, technology won't solve the problem," and we see this a lot with solicitors. And and I think part of the problem is that they don't look at what sort of technology can solve issues, and instead we just come to this thing about says, I look at it as like a mail merge and workflow. And people say, oh, but we need decent lawyers, not this technology. That won't solve the problem. And it's incredibly frustrating because technology will solve the problem.
Okay, well, I mean, I've been an estate agent since 1979, and it takes much longer now than it used to complete a property or to exchange contracts on a property. Why do you think that is?
There's several reasons. One of the problems that we've got is there are certain parts of the process are more difficult than they used to be in terms of, for example, dealing with lender requirements. That certainly makes it challenging. One of the big problems that we've got is the demands of the consumer to be able to do things far more quickly. And actually, that is actually counterproductive. Because what you find, for example, the way that we handle the central part or the black hole of conveyancing, as I like to call it, the inquiries, they're pushed so fast to try and get answers back that they often come back with nothing. So in the past, the way that you would get a set of inquiries and someone would reply to all of the answers, now, just so that a lawyer can get, their people off their back, they'll come back with answers saying, for example, to follow. Because this pressure is to say, quick, you need to come back really quickly. They come back with an answer, but the answer is useless. And that's
you said there, Peter, that lenders' requirements have slowed things up. How have lenders' requirements changed then?
If you look at the Council of Mortgage Lenders Handbook now compared with, say, 5 years ago, the requirements are so much higher. And of course, there are so many issues that come up. I mean, the classic problem that we're seeing at the moment, cladding. Yeah, this came out of nowhere, as we know, a few years ago, and it's now one of the huge problems that we see. Escalating ground rents. That's another problem where all these things that change in the market, and typically what happens is, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, these issues arise because normally someone's got sued. And so some lawyers got sued. It then goes on a training course that they tell about being sued. And suddenly every other lawyer in the land goes, oh, that could be me. So then they have to do extra work. It's exactly the same principle if you look at the chancel search. Yeah, it was one case of chancel repair, okay? And now every single case that we do, we have to do a chancel search on it. And it was purely because someone got sued and lost.
But that's a very good point insofar as one experience can ruin this. I mean, the issue of cladding, people have known about, well, sadly, since Grenfell 3 years ago. So from that perspective, that's now a well-accepted part of what happens. Is it really the case that for the lenders, one rotten apple can make the whole thing that much slower? Because that would explain why everything's got slower.
It's not for the lenders, it's for the poor lawyers. And so you need sympathy with us. Basically, yeah, all it takes is someone to get sued once. And yeah, absolutely. And then everyone runs for the hills. No, absolutely it is. I mean, we update our precedents all the time. So we'll be reading something, we'll read something online and go, oh, someone got sued on that. It's like, wow, okay, put that into our client care, put that into our inquiries. And no, that's absolutely what happens. Absolutely.
Because one of the things I mentioned in my piece, and one of the reasons you commented on it, why we're talking now, is that there's this triangle of people involved in the process. As I said at the beginning, you've got solicitors, you've got lenders, and you've got estate agents. And there's a sort of blame triangle that tends to go on. The received wisdom is that solicitors hate estate agents because they get paid far too much, and they're just, all they do is say what's happening. Agents hate the lenders because the lenders take so long. You guys have problems with the lenders. I mean, part of what I was talking about when I did the piece was about, I wish there was some sort of, I think I used the wrong word actually. I talked about Star Wars, which shows my ignorance with this sort of, I'm a Star Trek fan. But I think it's a Babel fish. It's a Google universal translator. So In terms of the ability for all the parties to speak, how far down that road are we? And what would you see as the ultimate end goal for that?
Definitely, and I do like the fact that you brought that up, because this is the absolute key. One of the problems that we've got is there's no easy way of sharing data, and this is the key. How do we share data amongst all the parties that are involved? And there are several problems with that. There's a push, as you know, at the moment, to get a lot of data up front, which is great. Store it in a place so that everyone can get it, which is a great principle, absolutely. The problem is that access, that where that data is stored, it needs to be accessed by everybody. Because if you imagine it in a chain, you know, 2 people are using a centralized system and 2 people aren't, for example, and they're in the problem. The key is, you're absolutely right, the key is getting everything talking to everything else. But what you have to do is you have to present that data in a way that is easy for people to integrate with it. So the challenges for that is you need the case management providers, you need the CRM providers to adopt a standardized way of talking to things.
But so, you and I both know, Peter, that that's just not going to happen because there are so many of them. I mean, in my piece, I mentioned 2 things. I think I mentioned, which you and I discussed briefly the other day, this thing called a pip vault, which is well, actually, in fact, I might ask you a much simpler question. Why the hell do auctions enable people to exchange contracts on the spot when it takes so long for the private? Let me put it another way. Why can't we do what auctions do?
It's a really good point. And actually, you know what auctions do? When you get an auction pack, you know what goes into it? It goes in all the title documents, all the documents you can find, all the searches, you put it all in there, and then you exchange at auction with a completion 28 days longer, 28 days later. They do provide all of the information, but the difference is it's take it or leave it. It's a little bit like a new build in many ways. You could say, when you're working from a developer, you go, those are the documents, and you can raise inquiries till the cows come home. But the developer's going to say, yeah, that's great, read the book. And that's normally what happens. And that's why they have those strict...
Those data rooms that are in the auction packs, they do at least enable, I mean, quite often you have 20 buyers bidding. So that assumes that all of their auctions, all of their solicitors have had a chance, all of these 20 buyers solicitors have had a chance to have a look at this pack sitting in a data room. So doesn't that point to a partial solution for this? I mean, it's not part of the CRMs. It's not part of any other case management system, but it is something that enables people to go to have a look.
It is absolutely a good idea, and that's what I say. If you could find what you need is you need a big enough company to be able to fund that. That's what you need. So you need this big old centralized data room and people having the means to do it. But the one problem with these data rooms is actually finding the property in the first place. So you need to be able to share some sort of data, some sort of information, but you're absolutely right, having a centralized place. We are talking with a provider at the moment who is actually, what they're doing is they're saying, we're putting the plumbing in place so that everyone can talk to it securely, to talk to this data. And but what you do is you can then store this data anywhere you like, which is a good idea, but you can do it securely, I like that. I'm a big fan of that, because then you've got the security, but you also got it abstracted so that you haven't got to be relying just on one provider.
No, that's fair enough. And I think that having that plumbing in place eventually, and I think we talked about this briefly before we started recording, and I think that was some sort of blockchain based system, which I think a lot of us still don't fully understand. Well, I certainly don't fully understand it. No reason why I should. But just before we started talking about data rooms, I mentioned this private treaty outfit called pip vaults, only because what they're doing is, surely that's just like an auction data room. Why shouldn't the estate agent and the solicitor and anybody else and the owner all put documents into a data room, which is then accessible by everybody? What's wrong with that?
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem with it is when you're buying an auction, you're basically taking on all the risk and you're sitting there saying, I'm going to buy this house come what may, there's money down. And so you don't have the opportunity to be able to ask questions about the property. And that's the challenge.
Okay, so it's a take it or leave it situation. Okay.
And it'll be cash.
It'll be interesting to see. And I mean, you know, the CRM suppliers, I think the idea, I think what a lot of, as you probably know, I run a business called Viewber. We do viewings for estate agents and all that sort of thing. And we are now beginning to be integrated into some platforms, and CRM systems are coming to us because we've been around for long enough. But there are so many of them. And getting this, I mean, do solicitors use any case management system that they all subscribe to? Do they do that?
It's a really interesting point. You'd be amazed how few do. There's all these stories in the press, that were not in the press, but in the trade journal, saying, "Oh, how COVID has revolutionised lawyers and so forth." Absolute nonsense. I interview a lot of lawyers. I've got to say, maybe half of them use case management systems, or where they do, and when they use them, they don't use them very well, and that's the problem. You'd be amazed. Most people, the vast majority of people, are using paper files. There are case management systems out there. Most of them are pretty dire. That's why we built our own, because we looked at the market. We went, "Oh, it's just a horrible, it's that Pandora's box, like, don't look there again." But where they do use them, they're often in like walled gardens. So it's literally, the person who uses it, they don't talk to anything, they don't communicate. They're certainly not cloud-based. I think I've come across 2 cloud-based case management systems. The rest of them, Windows-based, sitting within a firewall. You can't get in, you can't get out. There are some connectors that we're seeing to some, like the ones that are better known, say, for example, like Claim with their Eclipse product, and people have to build these horrible connectors to get into that data. So they're there, but the technology is 10 years old plus. There are a few new ones, but most, if they're using technology beyond Windows Explorer, which most aren't, really old and really a bit rubbish.
It does sound like there's really quite an issue here in terms of where to go next. And it is not entirely, well, to me, the issues of this communication, of being able to give everybody somewhere to go to one place where they can see all the information and put all the information, know who's looking at the information, that still seems to be the problem. Just so that people understand how well qualified you are to talk about it, obviously your business, the partnership, how many cases do you have going at any one time?
Yeah, we're busy at the moment. We are running about 2,000 cases, of which we would expect to churn about sort of 600 in a month, get to exchange. So we're running about the number. We've got 25 lawyers running that. So we're quite busy at the moment. That's a little bit higher than where we should be, but we've got more people joining. But it's, we think every lawyer should run about 70 cases or so, 75.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting, because I think a lot of people who are watching this will have absolutely no idea of what the sort of, the average caseload is for a solicitor.
Well, to be fair, I've taken on someone recently who came from a competitor working by herself. She was running 150 cases with paper files, no case management system. And you wonder why it's so slow. It's ridiculous. They're working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Do you know what? I think that's a really good place to stop. I think that just absolutely describes what the problem is. You've gone from one extreme to the other. So what I'd say to everyone watching this is, if you want to know more or find out how it's done, contact Peter at the partnership. If they want to do that, how do they get in touch with you? What's your email address?
Well, email address is p.ambrose@thepartnershiplimited, and that's in full, limited.com.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm really appreciative of you for getting in touch after I wrote my piece, B, taking the time to talk now, and I'm sure if anybody's got any questions, they'll be in touch. So thanks very much for your time, Peter.
Absolute pleasure.